information from the shop floor into nav so that they can make decisions in real time, and get that accurate data from their operations. A few clients, we've got some products that we're big in automotive. Some of those you might recognize, some not. Some of the largest nav users in the world are using our products to manage their facilities, their warehouse and their inventory counts and those sorts of things. So that's just a smattering of the clients that are currently using our solutions. And what are those solutions? Well, the big one this time of year is the physical inventory count module. So it's an advanced inventory count tool that sits on top of nav and really takes you where you need to be for doing your inventory counts. So if you have a lot of data or a lot of inventory, especially if you're doing serial number or lot numbers, I mean, that's a tool that almost everybody needs. It's almost a must-have. Then we have mobile WMS, so the mobile inventory management, which of course, like it shows on this image here, allows you to run on handheld devices and perform all your warehouse operations. And then finally, shop floor data collection, which is more activity oriented, so typically for production, but it's really tracking labor time associated with activities, warehouse or production. Okay. And generally, we prefer supporting NAV 2013 and up, but we do have support for the older versions as well. So that's just a brief overview of the product line, and you'll see some of those in action here in a little bit. All right, so first let's talk about why you would want those products. So, everybody on this presentation deals with data, right? I mean, that's why you bought NAV, is to manage your data. And, that data really could be a competitive advantage for you. So for example, if your inventory accuracy is quite high, you're going to have better on-time delivery, you're going to have lower cost of carrying that inventory, all of those sorts of things. So it really could help you, run your business better and be more competitive if that data is timely and accurate. The issue is that, a lot of people are still doing paper-based transactions. So every time they do something in the shop, do a pick or a shipment or a receipt, everything is done on paper and it tends to be batched. So it's not real time. It ends up in nav, hours or possibly days after the fact, and that's not really, viable for having that timely and accurate information that's going to give you that competitive advantage. So, anytime that you're doing that sort of paper-based batch type operation, you're not going to be in sync. Your nav system isn't going to be in sync with your physical reality, and that's where the problems come in. So you lose transactions, you forget to invoice customers because the shipment hasn't been recorded in time. You don't receive the product into nav, and therefore you don't think you have it, so you expedite additional inventory. All of those sorts of things are causing you problems. So really, paper-based, it's not ideal, but if you're stuck with a paper-based solution, really you want to try and manage that in a more real-time manner than sort of this batch mode. So again, to improve it, first you want to make sure that your nav configuration is suitable for the way you work in the physical world. So one example that we'll touch on later as well is, let's say you've got serial numbers turned on because you need that traceability. Do you need those serial numbers turned on in the warehouse? Do you need the guys to write down a 10-digit serial number every time they do a pick? Or is it okay just to record it at the time of shipping or at the time of receipt? Those types of things. So ensuring that you have, the appropriate configuration in nav to support your physical processes is quite important. Then, as I mentioned, you manage your inventory as real-time as possible. So if you're stuck with a paper-based solution, make sure that that data is getting into the system as soon as possible. So you don't do things like expedite extra inventory because you don't realize you've actually received it already. Another important aspect when we're dealing with inventory is improving your count accuracy. So many times we go into situations where, people have done an annual inventory count, and for the next 2 months, they're doing constant corrections because it was all counted wrong, right? I'm sure that you've seen that yourselves, where you do an inventory count and often it messes up your inventory more than it fixes it. And then to complement that, Cycle counting is always a good tool to bring out, where you're counting inventory regularly so you can clean up, those discrepancies sort of as you go, rather than wait for once a year to clean it up and then 2 months to sort of find the problems within it. And then the last one, the one that we're going to talk about a lot later, is barcoding. So barcoding is actually a very accessible technology, and it solves a lot of these issues that we're talking about. All right, so let's talk about the NAV configuration first, starting with the warehouse. So NAV offers both sort of basic and advanced warehousing capabilities, and the basic is actually can get quite complex, because you can mix and match a whole bunch of different options to control the processes that are enabled or prescribed down on the shop floor. Okay, so even basic, you can get quite advanced. And then the advanced warehousing, of course, forces all of those options on and does a few other things that sort of constrain the warehouse a little more, but also provides a little more control over it. And so that's, those are sort of the two broad options that you have: basic and advanced warehousing, or NAV, it's called directed pick and put away, is the advanced side of it. But for you, really what you need to do is determine what your best physical process is. Do you need a two-stage pick, where you pick something, you deliver it to shipping, and then they validate it before it actually gets shipped? Or do you just pick directly against the sales order? Right? So those types of things, you want to validate what the most appropriate physical process is, and then configure NAV to match that. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, because sometimes a different configuration of NAV can improve the physical process. But in general, you want to look at what's going to work best in your shop, and then try and make NAV match that process, rather than turning on advanced warehousing and trying to match your physical processes to what NAV is telling you what you need to do. Now, if you're not going advanced warehousing, you have a number of options. You can turn various things on and off. And the big ones are, do you use bins or not? So bins give you more control over identifying where inventory exists within the facility. So especially if you have the same item in multiple places, bins might be a very good fit for you, but they're not absolutely necessary in all cases. Inventory documents. So, do you want to use an inventory pick and inventory put away to manage, how you receive and ship product? Or do you just go to a sales order and a purchase order, right? Do you need that division of duties where you have a separate document for the warehouse versus the order desk? Similarly for warehouse documents, there's warehouse picks and warehouse putaways and movements and other things. Those provide a lot more functionality, like, batch picking and those types of things. But do you need the headache? Do you need those extra set of layers that incurs in order to run your facility? Right? So those are the questions you need to ask. And then, of course, the directed pick option, which is the advanced warehousing, sort of enables all of that, gives a lot more functionality. But I would say in the vast majority of cases that we run into, that directed pick is overkill for what people need to do. So people are turning on this advanced warehousing thinking they need that in order to run their warehouse, when in fact that's unlikely to be the case. There's very specific criteria that you can use to determine whether directed pick is a fit for you or not. And if you have questions on that, just contact your Innovia rep, and they can definitely help you walk through those concerns. Okay. So just a quick look at what it looks like in NAV. So this is the location card in NAV and all the different options. So that bottom one, that directed put away and pick, well, second from the bottom, when you enable that, most of the other options are turned on by default. If you don't enable that, then you can pick and choose all of those different options. So there's 6 major categories of warehouse configuration, but there are dozens of different combinations of configurations that you can set up within NAV to match your process. So it is important to look at that first, then come in here and choose the configuration that's going to match the way you're going to work. Okay. All right. Oops, one too many. So now let's talk a little bit about items. So you go in and you figure out from a warehouse standpoint what makes sense for documents and those sorts of things, processes, and then you come in and you look at how are your items configured. And there's a few big ones that I wanted to mention here. that do have an impact on how things work. First is item tracking, so that's lot number or serial number tracking. And I mentioned that earlier, where if you've got item tracking turned on and you're doing a paper-based system, and you're forcing people to write down every serial number or lot number they pick or move or ship or receive, that can be very cumbersome and very inaccurate. It's very easy to write down, if you're writing down 20 different 10-digit serial numbers, it's very easy to get one character wrong out of that big list, and that can cause problems, right? So the specific tracking, I'll show you the option in a sec, for item tracking when you're using a paper-based system is very cumbersome, and it might not be worth it. Okay, so looking at your need for traceability, so if you're in foods or something like that, there's a very high requirement for traceability, and sort of balancing that with the processes and the capabilities you have within your facility is an important aspect, right? If you go to barcoding, then a lot of that concern goes away completely. The other one is count configuration. So doing your inventory counts, and everybody hates inventory counting at the end of the year, and even cycle counting. So when you do it, you want to make sure you do it correctly. Now, when we're talking about cycle counting, there's a few things you need to set up in NAV. The physical inventory counting period code, which is your ABC code in the more common terminology. So setting up those ABC codes. In base NAV, that's an entirely manual process. Our tools have the ability to automate that, but you can go in and you can set up your ABC codes to allow you to cycle count. And then this next counting period is generated by NAV, and in 2015 and up, they've finally changed it to a start and end date versus a period. But at any rate, that next counting period tells you when you're supposed to count those items. Keeping that configuration valid and applicable to your actual inventory is very important when you're dealing with cycle counting your product. Okay, and then the last one I'll mention, it's not really sort of an operational warehouse shop floor type of thing, but the reordering policy that you set up. If you're running the requisition worksheet or the planning worksheet, in other words, if you're running MRP, that reordering policy has a huge impact, as you probably know, on what your inventory level is. So min-max is usually the most common one that's used, the max quantity. And min-max tends to drive your inventory levels up, right? So you're always driving towards the max. As you get down to the min, it pushes you back up to the max. An alternate approach is lot for lot, which is the opposite. It tends to it tends to pull your inventory down. It's always trying to pull you back down to zero or to your safety stock. So if you have a lot of inventory and you hate counting it, and you're doing a lot of min-max inventory, you may want to evaluate which items are better suited to lot for lot, where it's pulling it down to zero and really only telling you to purchase, when there's demand or when you've hit your safety stock. Okay, so that's a little bit of an aside, but it's an important concept. Min-max tends to drive your inventory up. Lot for lot tends to pull your inventory down. Less inventory on hand means less to count, which is great. As long as you can still meet your demand, that's a good thing. All right, so a couple screens out of NAV. This top one, the warehouse one, that's the warehouse tab on the item card, and those are the fields that are applicable to your inventory counts. So the physical inventory counting period code, the last count date for that particular item, and the next counting start date and end date, which is when you're supposed to count that particular item. So those, the physical inventory count period code is manually managed in base NAV. As I mentioned, we have tools that can do that, and that largely drives the rest of it. Okay, so based on that and the last physical inventory date, it'll sort of drive the rest of those fields so that you can do cycle counting appropriately. The one that says serial number there, that is out of the item tracking code screen. And this one has serial number specific tracking turned on. So you'll see that there are a ton of options for serial numbers, and the same goes for lot numbers. And the important ones are, do you want that specific tracking turned on, which means that every transaction you do requires a serial number. Moving things around between locations, shipping, receiving, everything requires a serial number. Okay, and if you want full traceability and you want to know which serial numbers or lot numbers you have in stock, you really need to turn that on. If you turn that off, you could track just the serial numbers you ship or just the serial numbers you receive, which might be useful as well. And then the next big one, other than that serial number specific tracking, is the serial number warehouse tracking on the top right there. And same goes for lot tracking. And what that does, if you have bins enabled, that tells you which bin holds which serial number, which lot number. And that one can be a little scary because now you're dealing with a couple of data points. Not only do you need to know which item and bin combination are valid, you now need to know which item, bin, and serial number combination are valid in order to perform a transaction. So if you're not using barcoding or a system that sort of manages that for you, that can be fairly problematic. It's great if you have to do a recall and you have to find exactly which bins hold which product. And if you're doing FIFO picking, which is first expired, first out, for foods and pharmaceuticals and things like that, then you need that turned on. You need to know which bin holds which lot number. But otherwise, often that's overkill. You need to ask yourself, do I really need to know which bin is holding which serial number? And if you don't really need to know that, then it's probably not a good idea to turn that on. Okay, so those are some basics on the configuration. Both WMS and the warehouse side. Now, once you've got that sorted out, you can use NAV. Lots of people use NAV as is, and they use the paper-based solution and everything else, and everything's happy. But of course, the alternate approach is to implement barcoding. So barcoding is a very accessible technology, and by that I mean it's low cost. It's very mature. It's been around since the 60s, and everything is commodity now. So all the devices and everything else you buy off the shelf. Even Walmart sells these rugged handheld devices. So it's a very accessible technology to get into place. And anything you do within the shop, you can record that physical transaction by scanning the barcode to improve the accuracy and efficiency. So now you're doing real-time management. So now if I'm receiving something, I scan it, and immediately NAV knows that, yes, this is being received, and you're not accidentally expediting product. When I ship something, that's immediately in the system, and we know that it needs to be invoiced. Similarly with picking and movements and all those sorts of things within the warehouse, we now have a much better level of inventory accuracy because we're matching up that physical world with our virtual NAV world in real time. If NAV thinks there's something different going on in the warehouse than what we're trying to scan, we get an error and we can correct it in real time and make sure that we've got that accuracy. All right, so with that, what I'm going to do is actually jump in and show you a couple of solutions around barcoding, but both for sort of managing the warehouse and for doing the physical inventory count. So with year end coming up and a lot of people doing their annual physical inventory counts at the end of the year, that's a very important topic. Okay, so I'm going to go into that, and let me just close this guy off. And what you see here on the screen is this handheld device, and I've actually got this physical device in my hand. So you'll see me, change the screen. I can scroll around and things like that and tap it, and I'll be scanning barcodes, and you'll see the screen react on your end. This device is, happens to be a data logic device, but I mean, like I said, it's commodity. You can run it on any device out there. There's Motorola, Honeywell, all sorts of different makes and models. And what we've got on the screen, and of course this is an add-on available through Novia, are all the different apps within this handheld device. And you can add your own apps in here. So there's a graphical workflow designer tool that you can come in. You can add your own business logic, add your own apps into the system without actually modifying the base product code, which is nice if you're doing upgrades yearly with Microsoft. All of your customizations that you might want, your custom business logic, come along for the ride. But generally, what we've got, there's about 20 different modules in the system by default. And things like inquiry, where I can scan a barcode and it tells me what it is. Inventory count, so there's a basic count and an advanced count. We'll be going through the advanced count to give you an idea of how you can save a lot of time and money on your inventory counts. Okay, we've got some offline processing, some advanced tools like license plating, where I can build up a palette of mixed serial numbers, lot numbers, products, and then use a single barcode to move that around, to ship it, to consume it, those types of things. Production for consumption and output, shipping and receiving, fairly straightforward, and it adapts. We went through that location configuration, the location card on the PowerPoint, and regardless of how you've got your location set up, this will adapt to reflect that configuration. So if you have directed pick turned on, then you get the full menu, you get the full meal deal. If you don't have picks and putaways enabled, then these menu items just aren't there. If I go into receiving and I don't have warehouse receipts turned on, well, I can just receive against a PO or a transfer order. If I turn on warehouse receipts, then I'm receiving to a warehouse receipt. So regardless of how you got NAV configured, this will adapt to that configuration and bring up the appropriate screens you need. Okay? So shipping and receiving, picks and putaways, and inventory movements, which can be either a directed move, in other words, we get a movement document within NAV that is sent down to the handheld that the guys actually execute, or they can be on the shop floor and just scan things to move them from one location to another, or from one bin to another as well. Okay, so that's a quick overview of the various modules available in the system. And what we're going to do first is I'm just going to show you one quick screen to show you what it looks like, and then we're going to jump into inventory count and talk about how you can use this tool for managing your accounts. So the first thing I'll do is I'm going to jump into the pick screen. So I'm going to tap on my device, the pick icon there, and it brings this up. And at this point, I can actually scan a barcode on a pick document. If you still want to do a paper-based pick as a physical trigger that says, hey, when I have a piece of paper in my inbox, that means I have work to do, the guy can pick it up, scan it, and start his work. Or if you want to go more paperless, I can hit the little magnifying glass thing there to do a lookup, and what it'll do is it'll show me a list of all the picks available in the system, who they're assigned to, and it could be auto-assigned, so if I choose a pick, it can assign it to me, and then somebody else tries to come in, it doesn't let them. But I'll choose a particular pick, and as you can see, it brings up that pick document and shows me everything that I'm supposed to pick. Now in this particular example, what we've got, and I just noticed it's updating on your end now, it looks like. What it shows me is all the items I need to pick and all the bins that I need to pick those particular items from. Okay, and if you have bins enabled, it shows you the bin. If you don't have bins enabled, you just don't see the bin column, and you just have to scan the items that you pick. So as an example here, and the nice thing about this, incidentally, is it gives you sort of the full context of that pick. So I can scroll through and I can see my entire workload for this particular pick, and I can make decisions on the shop floor if I need to about what makes sense for the execution of this particular pick. Okay, so in this particular case, I can come in here and let's say my first bin that I'm supposed to pick from is this W401, which NAV has directed me to, but I happen to be standing in front of a different bin. So all I really have to do is come into the system, scan the bin that I'm in front of. If that bin exists on this particular pick, it will find it. It'll find the first line where that bin exists for informational purposes, and then I can scan the item that I need to pick out of that particular bin. So what it's done is it said, I've taken one already, and there's three remaining to pick. So I just scan that particular item, and what it does optionally is it can show me a picture. That flashed up pretty quick. I don't know if you saw it on your end, but it shows me a picture of that particular item, and that's an option you can turn on and off, and that gives me some visual verification that what I scanned is actually what I'm holding in my hand, right? So again, there to improve inventory accuracy. And now it prompts me for a quantity, and this is another option that you can set. So I could set this to default to a quantity of 1. I can have it not even show the dialog box. So in other words, if I have to pick 4, I have to scan 4 times. I can also default it to the remaining quantity on the line, which means if I have to pick 3, I scan that item, and it just defaults in the quantity I'm supposed to pick, and I move on. So normally, though, we default it to 0, so the person has to explicitly say that, yes, I'm taking 3 or 4 or whatever out of this particular bin. And again, that's that verification step, validation that, he's actually doing what he's supposed to do. So in this case, I'm just going to enter 1, hit enter on my keypad, and you can see that now I've taken 2, and there's 2 remaining. Now let's say at this point, I've taken 2 out of this bin. I need to take 2 more, but the bin happens to be empty for some reason, and I don't know why. So what do I do at this point? So do I write this on the back of my hand and walk into the office an hour later and try and figure out what happened, which is usually what happens in these situations? Or can I make some decisions on the shop floor? So let's do that. So the first thing I want to do is notify my supervisor that something is wrong out here. Now, if you have a device that has a camera and a microphone, I could take a picture of that bin, and that automatically gets attached to this document, and it optionally notifies somebody, the warehouse supervisor as an example, that there's this new attachment. They can look at the picture and figure out what's going on. I could also record a voice note, which acts exactly the same way. Gets attached to this document. Supervisor gets notified. He can listen to my note. Or in this case, since this device has neither of those, I can just add a text note, and I can use some, standard text codes I've set up in nav. BE has been empty, and I'll just put in, the bin that was empty here, hit OK, and away I go. So what I've done, if we go back and look behind here in nav, here's that note that I just created. I've now notified the warehouse supervisor that there's an issue. He can click on this, and he can see the document, see the note, and address the problem. So I haven't taken a step from that bin, and I've started the process of fixing this inventory. Okay. There's also the ability to do things like sort of real-time cycle counts. So at this point, I could have a workflow in here that asks me for the remaining quantity in this bin, and I can specify 0 to set that to 0, while people are sorting things out. But at any rate, I've notified somebody that there's an issue. The next thing I want to do is say, okay, well, I still need 2 of these. Where can I get them from? So my handheld, I could hit F8 and drill down, or I can tap the screen, which is what I'll do, so you can sort of see visually see what I'm doing. So I can now drill down and do an item inquiry on that particular item. And what it does is it brings up more details about that item. So it shows me that, okay, there's inventory in that particular bin, and I now know that, okay, I can't get the inventory out of the bin I'm in front of, but here's a bin where I could actually go pick from. So I don't have to necessarily interrupt my pick and go back to the office and figure out what to do. I could substitute this bin and go and pick from it instead. So I can still complete my mission, if you will. I can still complete my pick, fairly seamlessly, just by virtue of having this additional information available to me on the shop floor. And there's a few other things we can do here. So if this was a serialized item, I could look at the details on the serial numbers, on the lot numbers. I could look at the lot information for it if I wanted to check expired product, that type of stuff. Anywhere within the system, I can customize these menus, so I can add my own business logic, my own reports, all of those sorts of things that I can do from the handheld device. Or if I just wanted to have a look at the picture again and see, what I have in my hand doesn't really match what showed up on the screen earlier, I can take a closer look at the picture, that type of stuff. Okay. So that drill down capability, again, helps the people on the shop floor make decisions without having to, go back to the supervisor or the office and try and sort things out through nav. They can do it in real time on the shop floor. Okay. Now once I've done this pick, I can post the pick. I can print, again, anything. That could be labels, that could be, the actual pick document. I can add my own custom business logic, my own menu items in here through the workflow. All of those sorts of things are possible. Okay. Now, so that's the pick. Now, of course, in this example, we pretended that, we have an inventory inaccuracy. So how do we fix, what's the first step in addressing that inventory accuracy problem? Well, it's having accurate inventory counts. If you're using a barcoded solution like this, where, if I scan something that's incorrect, it tells me at that point. So it forces me to ensure that inventory is accurate. And which means that once I've got a base set of data in the system that is accurate, it's going to stay accurate for the most part, right? As long as people are scanning and doing things appropriately, once I got my inventory accurate through an inventory count, it will largely stay accurate. So we need to focus on inventory counts. We need to make sure they're easy to do and that they're accurate. So let's jump into the count module and have a look at how that works. So if I'm doing a full physical count at the end of the year, what I can do is I'd go set everything up in Nav. So I set up my inventory count in Nav. And what I do in Nav, and I'll show you the interface in a bit, we come in and we set up count sheets. Okay, so if I've got 4 teams of people out there counting, so 4 handhelds, let's say, I'd create 4 count sheets, and I've got a master and a recount here. But I happen to be on team 1, so the handheld I'm using, I'm team 1, and you can name them whatever you like, of course, Bill and Bob, Joe and Frank, whatever. But I'm going to grab team 1 sheet, and I'm going to open that. And in the case of a full physical, you basically start out with a blank sheet, so it's a blank page. And at this point, all I have to do is I tell team 1, you guys are counting these 2 rows. That's your job. You count everything you find in this area of the warehouse. And so what they do is they walk up to the first bin, they scan it. Again, if you don't have bins enabled, you don't have to scan the bin. You can scan the shelf number if you like, if you're using SKUs or just the shelf number on the item card. But I scan the bin to identify where I'm at. And then I simply scan the item I find in that particular bin, right? And again, optionally, we can have the picture show up, but often for inventory counts, we turn that off, that picture. Oops, sorry, it looks like I scanned the wrong barcode here. Okay, so basically, what it looks like my barcodes that I have in front of me are not valid. But basically what I do is I can scan those barcodes. What it will do is it'll bring up those entries on the sheet. I simply specify the quantity that I've counted for that particular item, and I move on to the next item. Simple as that. So really what a user does is scan the bin, scan the item, enter the quantity, and move on to the next one. If it's a serialized item, he simply scans the barcode with a serial number on it, and it doesn't prompt for quantity or anything else. It simply goes in and records a quantity of 1 with that particular serial number. Okay, and that's really the process for doing the inventory counts on the handheld. Now, what that looks like when we go into Nav is we've got an inventory count set up. So this is a history of all the inventory counts that have occurred in the past. So you can retain that history if you want. So in standard Nav, what you have is you have a physical inventory journal, and that's it. And once you post it, it's gone. You can look in the physical inventory ledger entries to sort of reproduce the count, but generally you don't have a full understanding of what actually happened during that count. So in this particular one, I'm going to open up one that I've done in the past, and it's very similar to the one we just did. And what I've got is I've got all of these sheets, and I've got information that the guys have scanned in on the shop floor. So in this case, Team 2 has scanned 5 items, and I can open that up and I can see everything that they've scanned. And the nice thing about this, as compared to the NAV Physical Inventory Journal, is I can add additional items onto this if I like, right? So in base nav, if I found an extra item that wasn't on the Physical Inventory Journal, I wouldn't be able to add that or anything else. Okay, so in this one I can. So it works for both paper-based and barcoded inventory counts. So if it's paper-based, I can generate the count sheets ahead of time and print out a count sheet for the guys on the shop floor to fill in the data, and then data entry people can just come down and enter the quantities. Okay. Now on this, you'll notice that I've got this quantity. It tells me that my difference is 23. So I counted 23. I expected 0 that lot number. So this is something that I might want to recount. So there's a number of ways you can actually do recounts, and what it does is allows you to do an audited recount, which means that if I just want to do this one, add this item to a recount sheet, or I could, multi-select and add multiple items. I can manually add it to a recount sheet. There's a way you can automatically generate recount sheets based on variation. So if I'm out by $1,000, or if I'm out by a quantity of 100, I can automatically add those things to a recount sheet. In this case, I'll just do it manually. So I'll grab that item. I'm going to add it to my recount sheet here. And what that does now is if I come in here and I try and edit the original quantity, it'll yell at me because I've added this to a recount sheet. Okay, which means that now when I go to that recount sheet and enter the quantity, I have an audit trail. I see what my original count quantity was, I see what my recount quantity was, and I can have recounts and recounts. So if you have auditors coming in to audit your inventory count, that's a very important piece of functionality. Okay. But once I've got everything counted in the system, so once the guys on the shop floor have gone through, scanned all the barcodes, entered the quantities, and they show up in NAV, the next step would typically be to do a reconciliation. So base NAV, you've got a test report that kind of gives you a breakdown of what the differences are. But it's very basic. You typically would have to export to Excel or something to do any sorts of analysis. So what this count difference analysis report does for me is it allows me to come in and I'm going to turn off all the options and just see at a high level where all my discrepancies are. So you'll see that it shows me all of my differences on that particular count by dollar amount. So whether it's plus or minus. So here's one that I'm up by $1,400, and the rest are sort of down by that amount. And that gives me a rough idea of where I need to start looking for recount opportunities. Okay. If I want to get more detailed, what I can do is I can show the details. So that shows me everywhere it was counted, all the recounts, everything else. And I can also show the item tracking issues. So if you have lot numbers and serial numbers, what this allows me to do is show the discrepancy at the lot number or serial number level. And when I post, it'll actually make the appropriate adjustments. And that's very important if you're tracking lot numbers or serial numbers, because base NAV, let's say I have an item that I have 100 in stock, 100 serial numbers in stock, and I happen to count 80 of those serial numbers. Well, NAV doesn't want to know which 80 I counted. It wants to know which 20 I didn't count because it needs to negative adjust those out. And that's a pain because now you have to manually go and figure out which 20 serial numbers are missing from your inventory count. Whereas what this will do is it'll actually tell you what you're missing and what you're over and all of those sorts of things. So if I preview it in this mode, you can see that it gives me all the details about where these items are, where they should have been counted, all of those sorts of things. And you can see it also lists all the recounts for it. So we've got this first line here where there's 54, and then I have a recount underneath where there's 34. So in this case, it shows me my original count quantity was 54, my recount was 34. Okay, so it gives me that full history. And if we go, I think this one does have the lot numbers, and it also breaks it out by lot number. So now it tells me, okay, I've got, I'm short 42 of this lot number, I've got an extra 133 of this lot number, so on and so forth. So I can see exactly what my discrepancies are for every item in the system, okay, down to the lot number or serial number level. Okay, so that tool in itself can save hours and hours of time. So between the barcode scanning and the reconciliation, you can often drop a week-long count. So we had a client recently that implemented this. It used to take them 5 days just to do the count because they had a lot of serial numbers, and then another few days for reconciliation. So it was over a full week, calendar week of inventory every year. After this, the last count they did, they finished start to finish 2 days. So counting and reconciliation in 2 days. So they basically saved 5 days of time. And 5 days might not sound like much, but you got to remember that if you've got an extra 5 days of 16 people counting, that's 90 man days that they've saved. The system effectively paid for itself the first time they used it, just based on the time it saved them on the inventory count. Okay. So again, the scanning of the barcodes to easily record the information on the shop floor, the ability to do the reconciliation, and the recount sheets are huge time savers, right? And then there's all the bonuses of being able to retain the history, being able to chart it and report on it. All of those sorts of things are just added bonuses for further analysis. Okay. All right, so that's the basic inventory count module. I will, because I mentioned you can customize that warehouse mobile side of things. This, incidentally, is the module within NAV. All the configurations you can do with the menus and report selections and all those sorts of things. To extend it with your own business logic, so if you wanted to add your own menu item or your own event after a barcode gets scanned to do something special, what we use is this graphical workflow tool here. So this is actually a complete application. This is our count application that lives on a handheld device for basic inventory counts. And this is how the application is built. It's a bunch of blocks that explain what happens. So, for example, when an item barcode is scanned, we perform all of these particular actions. So it's a bunch of if-then statements, and it's all graphical. So if I want to extend this, I can do things like, you know, let's say when we need to reload the document data, I can, you know, I can give a message that says, you know, reloaded data. So I can drop this in here, put whatever text I want, and that's how I do my programming. Okay, so I drag and drop to sort of extend the system in this tool. And there's all sorts of things you can do. So you can, you know, drop in an action that says I need a signature, and then it'll pop up a signature dialog on the handheld device. Or, you know, I need to take a picture at this point, and it'll pop up the camera on the device. So that's really one of the tools we use for extending the system. Okay. So at that point, you know, I've gone over the bulk of what I wanted to cover, and I can open it up to any questions that anybody has, and I can go through and you know, cover off any additional topics if there are any questions.
All right, great, Mark. We do have a few questions. Here's the first one. Can I use phones or tablets in the warehouse?
Yes. So you know, generally in the warehouse, we recommend these sort of ruggedized devices like this data logic guy here. They're more ergonomic. Sorry, I had some trouble there. They're easier to hold. Let's put it that way. They're easier to hold and use, and they're very rugged. So you can drop them. I've seen them get run over by forklifts and survive, that type of thing. Whereas the phones, you know, there's a lot of swiping, a lot of tapping. They're harder to hold. They break a lot easier. Tablets, if you have a picking card and things like that, a tablet isn't a bad approach either. You know, these same applications will run on a tablet. But again, if you have somebody running out there with a basket or something for picking, a tablet isn't the way to go. For outside sales guys and things like that are doing inventory counts for vendor managed inventory or whatever, phones and tablets, great idea. But warehouse, typically we want the ruggedized devices.
Okay, our next question. If I'm using the inventory journal, is there a report that shows me what to recount?
Right. So the physical inventory journal or warehouse physical inventory journal, if you have directed picks, doesn't really have recount functionality. So the test report is really all you get. You can export to Excel and sort of wade through the data there and figure out what you need to recount. But then you're going back and modifying the original count value. So you don't have that same functionality I just showed you with that audited recount or the ability to identify what needs to be recounted. So the base nav functionality is very limited.
Our next question, how long does it usually take to get barcoding in place?
It depends on your environment. You know, if you already have Wi-Fi in the warehouse, then you're way further ahead. The actual software implementation is usually a day or two. So it's actually very quick to get a solution like this in place and configured, and then there's typically a week of people testing and training with it internally, and then it's rolled out into live. So calendar time, you know, you can do it in as quick as 2 weeks. That's fairly common.
And our last question, Mark, what does it usually cost to get set up?
So again, it depends a little bit on your environment, how many users you have, what you're trying to accomplish. The best bet is talk to your Innovia rep, and they'll help figure that out for you. But you know, a small system with the hardware, everything else, you know, you're generally not looking at tens of thousands of dollars to do it. You know, it's very affordable. It's a very affordable technology. But talk to your Innovia rep, and they'll help you out.
Great. Well, on that note, I just want to remind everybody you can reach Innovia through our website, innovia.com, where we will also be putting a recording of this website before the end of the day. So, Mark, I just want to thank you so much for your presentation, and I want to thank our attendees, and we hope to see everyone at our next webinar.
Okay. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.